The Missing Witches Project is entirely listener supported, and listener, we want you to join us. Do you want to be part of a community that helps make public research into marginalized ideas? Do you want to join in interviews with all these magical people and meet other anti-racist, trans-inclusive, neuroqueer, feminist practitioners of different kinds from all over the world in our monthly circles? Or are you maybe just down to send a little money magic towards these stories and ideas and the causes we support? Anyway, either way, check out missingwitches.com to learn more about us. And please know, we've been missing you. And one last thing before we start. The stories we tell require a general content warning. It's just a fact of this terrain of interrogating what is missing. We promise to hold those moments with care.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Missing Witches podcast. Welcome to our coven, and welcome, seed bearer, Shabina Lafleur-Ganji. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I'm so excited to learn much more about all of your amazing projects, but I want to put it in your hands, in your words. Can you take a second to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Shabina. I'm a community herbalist. I've been learning and practicing. I keep saying it's been like 12 years, but I think now it's been significantly longer, maybe 15. And a community organizer. I've been using plants and herbs as a way to sort of help support movements for liberation. And I run a school alongside my co-conspirator, Stephanie Morningstar, called Seed, Soil, and Spirit School. It's a school primarily by and for racialized folks, but open to everybody. And we talk a lot about land stewardship and community herbalism and legacies of plant medicine. So I think I would say like just a general plant nerd living in Toronto.
Yes, you're out of Guelph, right? And
Yeah.
You have a farm there?
Okay, so that's a good question. We've been sort of working on it slowly. So in our first year, we worked with a bunch of families to grow a bunch of stuff during the pandemic, which was great and fun. And last year I actually took a little bit of a break, mostly because I just popped out a kid.
Fair, totally fair.
But this year, I think we're sort of laying down the foundation to do like a proper community consultation, and just work with everybody to make sure that it's a half-acre space, and we're really hoping to build like an outdoor classroom, and sort of like be a bridge between like various racialized communities, and to really create a co-creative space for cross-cultural connection around plant medicines, traditional foods, and all those things. So we're really hoping to get the ball rolling, and it's coming slowly, but it's, I think with any work that is done to build the foundation properly, it takes a long time. So yeah.
Yes, I think something that, the forest and humans definitely have in common is that we require diversity and biodiversity. So I love that like both of those notions of diversity are coming into your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to. We need to figure out how to get along.
And one of your taglines, I think it's from your website, it might be from Seed, Soil, and Spirit, and we will get into Seed, Soil, and Spirit. Listeners, you're going to be so excited about this. One of your taglines is reclaiming ancestral knowledge for collective liberation. Now, I mean, I want a t-shirt that says that, but can you maybe like expand it past a bumper sticker into like what you were thinking or how you feel about that statement?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think, funny enough, I don't even think I thought about it that hard when I wrote it down, but when I think about it more and more, it really sets in. And I think, as people who have like been historically or currently forcibly displaced. Much of like what's happened, aside from our severance from land, is our severance from culture, plant medicine, communities, ways of being, etc. Right. And I think being able to like learn about those things and to dig into it can sort of unveil or unearth all these legacies of how we've lived with the land, and also with each other. I think sometimes when we think about history, sometimes we look at it through rose-colored glasses, and I keep talking to other people about it, is when we think traditional, sometimes we actually think about it in this way that's romanticized. But sometimes when we actually dig into those ugly histories, or we dig into those a little bit deeper, into, maybe how certain practices came to be, something a little bit deeper than before white people came along in our histories, we often find that we actually have much more complex histories with one another, as racialized people. And I think part of that uprooting is being able to really look at ourselves and look at where we've come from and where we're going. For many of us, we have these prophecies of us coming together, and these are times, these are prophetic times. These are times where we know in our cultures, our various cultures, this is kind of like our do or die, like we're at a crossroads, and we all to a certain degree have these stories. And I think being able to look at where we've come to see where we are gives us a huge amount of context about how we relate to plants, how we relate to each other, and how we might be able to come together in a way that honors those legacies, and does justice to them.
So what can we learn from plants that we can't learn from other people?
I was actually just talking to one of my colleagues and friends, Ayo Ngozi, and she was talking about, leading some workshops about like sound and taste and meditation and all these things, in terms of her as being a person who is sort of severed from herbal traditions through the transatlantic slave trade. Sometimes those answers of being able to like look back are significantly more difficult, right? You don't necessarily have like somebody to tell you, this is exactly where you're from. So that work, in that example, of course, but for a lot of people can be, we might not find exact answers to the questions that we have. And I think that sometimes through these acts of just sitting and listening to ourselves, listening to the plants, we find those answers. And, I think they are our kin. At the end of the day, they have been with us through and through generationally, right? I always have this like clear memory of, I'm such a frazzled person sometimes. And I was making all these tinctures, and as per usual, like every year I forget to label a few of them, and I remember this very clear memory of trying to like looking at 3 bottles and having no idea what was going on. So I just opened one up and smelt it, and all of a sudden like this image came to me, and I knew right away. I was like, this is turmeric. Like I don't have to try this. I didn't even consciously think of the smell. It was just this imagery that came up right away, right? And I think these ways of knowing that show us the way are clear teachers. In part of what we do at our school is that the students each get a pack of herbs a month, and we kind of like give them like basic guidelines of how to like sit with the plant and sort of try to understand its medicine. But, everybody sort of has their journal, and they don't know what the plant is. They just feel it out. And from there, like, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You hear all these stories of, what they think the plant might be good for or how they felt, but then also like the images that come to them and the histories, the legacies, and it like they don't even necessarily know what plant it is, but when you actually find out and then they are able to dig into their lineages, it's right there. Those images, those visions, those feelings, those are all part of what that plant is trying to convey to us. And I think that is just a tiny little door to open into a much deeper realm of understanding and of knowing generationally, right? So I think, plants have been with us since the dawn, right? And these stories, these stories are there and we can access them. It's just being able to listen in a different way, I think, sometimes.
Yes. I didn't grow up with a lot of plants, so I'm sort of an adult learner when it comes to these things. But I've heard herbalists say that herbalism is like a form of storytelling or is akin to storytelling. Can you kind of, listeners, I'm making a grand hand gesture. When I can't think of the word, I just make a big hand gesture. Can you talk about this relationship between herbalism and storytelling and how they are the same, if so?
Of course. I mean, okay, so I am a clinical herbalist. I studied Western herbalism, then eventually Ayurvedic medicine, which is my family on my father's side is from India, and then eventually traditional Chinese medicine. Because, I mean, when you look at it, Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, basically the same thing, I would say, with a few minor differences. But really, the medicine and the similarities speak to the migration of people and knowledge between the two areas. And I think even just that alone, like I've told you, right? When we start to practice certain things, we can sort of like dig in a little bit deeper. Like, when was this formula? When is this classical formula? When does it come up in history? And what's actually happening? What's going on? When did my people start using this herb? Like, this herb isn't from this area. What happened? And I think these are the questions that I love digging into, because it tells us a lot, and it's often the histories that aren't really put forward to the the ones that people like acknowledge all the time, but they're there. I mean, even I remember digging sort of like into sort of like herbal TCM treatments for like opioid withdrawal, and looking at the formulas, right? And when we look at when those formulas came about, we look at, okay, well, the British are coming into China and trying to make some money, right? And they're not able to sort of like have that same imperial footing into the country as they were in some other countries. So their way of trying to brutalize the country looks completely different. And so they're bringing in masses and masses of opium right into the country, which, I mean, teams up with my own history as somebody from, with Indian roots, because that opium is being grown in India, and then brought into China. And, at a certain point, you see about almost about 30% of the male population is then becoming opium dependent at this point in time. And so these formulations start to emerge from this period. And so, it's like all these histories and legacies of resistance are interwoven into these formulas, which, I mean, as a practitioner, you can just use them. But when you dig into the legacies of them, it tells a whole other story, And even for me, I love the history. I love the history of migrations of plants. We talk about like different herbs that are used in Ayurvedic medicine since thousands of years, but we look at them and they're originally from Ethiopia. So what is that migration of plants? How does that tell a story? And even then, from India to China and back and forth, all of these formulas, these plants, they tell a story of something that goes much further back than what we have right now. I mean, I think sometimes we talk about our relationship as racialized people, as BIPOC, or, white, non-white. We're only scratching the surface to the last 500 years, but plants tell us a much deeper history. And so I love that. Like, plants are storytellers, and even still, like, so many of our stories of plants are so similar. We look at things like rose grows all across the globe, but our teachings around it are so similar. Our stories, our ways of knowing the plant, they overlap throughout, right? Whether that's from Turtle Island to North Africa to, India, throughout the Middle East, etc. Like these stories of roses, they always speak to the heart. They always speak to the beauty of rose. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful, but it's, they are storytellers, and they're storytellers in so many different ways. And I think it's the practice of herbalism and developing these intimate relationships with these plants is unearthing those stories, and those stories can tell us so much.
Yeah, they found unearthed a Neanderthal grave. They being, archaeologists and scientists, unearthed a Neanderthal grave that had flowers in it.
Yeah.
And I just kind of ruminate on that sometimes, that like our relationship with flowers, plants, of course, we eat them, and flowers, but just as like an emotional messenger, flowers. It's amazing.
Absolutely. It's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I want to ask you, how did you get into herbalism? Did you have a childhood relationship with plants? Is it something that you've just, sort of professionalized, but it's always been you?
Well, my parents never really were super into the Western medical system for a variety of reasons, but one of them being my grandmother on my mom's side was hardcore, really into cupping and plants, and had her own set of traditions around how to do things, which is so similar to my other side, actually. And I have some family members that have studied Ayurvedic medicine. And I loved the Harry Potter books. I was like, I don't know about this world, but I think the herbology classes sound great. And then I remember actually one day I was hitchhiking after high school was done. I had done 1 year of university, and was like, oh, I can't do this. I don't even know what the hell you guys are talking about. I remember there's this clear conversation. It was people were arguing what was the most important, frontline resistance or academics. And I was like, why is this an argument? I have to leave now. And so, and no dissing academics, but and I think particularly certain people from communities whose knowledge has been completely attacked are doing great work within academia, but this in particular was a group full of white people. But but I remember leaving after that and being oh, I'm just gonna travel. I was 18 at the time, and I was drinking on the side of the water, and then all of a sudden my friend's arm blew up to twice the size and turned purple, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And we ended up by going to a friend's house that I hardly knew, and she put some comfrey leaf on it, and it was back to normal the next day, which kind of blew my mind. And I think it was at that point that I was like, you know what, this is amazing. And as somebody who's been sort of, I would say, dicked around by the medical system when I was younger a lot, the concept of being able to have sovereignty over what happens to me and my body, and a say in what happens, how to be able to treat it, was really important. And so, yeah, I started taking classes eventually soon after, and I just stuck with it.
So on the subject of school, let's get into seed, soil, and spirit. First of all, I love this title for a school because I really think these are three necessary components. We often leave out the spirit part, but not in this circle. In the world at large, we leave out the spirit part. So multi-part question. What is it? What do you do there? Why did you start it? And why was the inclusion of the word spirit important to you in the naming? I can repeat parts of the question later.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Well, I will say that I will not take credit for the name. I started the school alongside Stephanie Morningstar, and her and I sort of started it by fluke, you could say. It was the winter of 2020, and we thought to ourselves, why don't we just host like a once a month kind of get together. I was growing herbs in Toronto at the time, and sort of this was a space that we could use. It had some picnic tables, so I thought, why not, right? And so we did a call out. We were going to get some students, and then, lo and behold, COVID happens. Totally unexpected to a certain degree. I was actually in a class, and my professor was an epidemiologist, so to a certain degree, I kind of expected it after a certain point. I really got the inside scoop. But anyways, point is that we ended up by moving online. We thought, okay, well, maybe we can just do we can just teach it online, which I don't really think either of us knew what we were getting into at the time. So we kind of lost our marbles for a couple of years trying to run it. It's been a huge learning curve, but really, I think the goal of the space has been to, one, sort of like pass on our skills. I think, the two of us have obviously been doing this work for a significant amount of time. I think we calculated it out to like 35 years together, right? And wanting to pass that on, but also like support our communities. And both of us have kind of like taken Western herb classes, and I think found it maybe traumatizing. Just a level of like appropriation and retelling of histories, and just the lack of seeing ourselves represented in any of the work. We really wanted to be able to offer something else. And instead of just constantly getting mad at what was there, just building what we want to build for our communities, and sort of like provide that resource and that space to sort of dig in a little bit deeper, right? There's so much potential in being able to have these conversations, so much beauty, but when you can't really get further than scratching the surface, there's so much that gets left there. And so really we wanted to be able to open that container and have that space. And so since 2020, we've had about just under 250 students, which is kind of significant. We started with like nothing, no money, no nothing, just pure love. We didn't even pay ourselves for the first year. And thank God for those COVID checks. But we taught classes on energetics of herbs, sort of some medicine making stuff, plant ID stuff, a lot of stuff linking sort of energetics to plants that grow here. So for a lot of people who are, diasporic people who don't necessarily have access to their traditional plants and herbs, being able to use the concepts of how we use them to the plants that grow here, right? Because our legacies are always migrating. We have, for me anyways, my people have been migrating for the last, 1,000 years. And so moving is nothing new, but it's being able to use these ideas to reconnect to our ways of being, and to sort of like uplift a lot of the histories and legacies of Indigenous folks here. And just being able to sort of bridge that those communities, Indigenous, Black, and diasporic communities together, to be able to have those conversations, to be able to sort of be that bridge, be that container, because a lot of people are wondering how best to come together. And really, I don't think we have those answers, but we have tools to bring ourselves together with these plants, with these ways of being. And so that's really the container we wanted to create for ourselves. And in 2022, we decided to take a little break and get some resources to really build what we wanted to build in a more sustainable way. And so we're really thinking big now, which is great. We've been working on a program called Wild Forage in Right Relationship. Don't just take care. And so essentially the idea is that, so much of the conversation around foraging happens on like a binary, right? On one side is like this concept that you need to be responsible, you can't take anything. and on the other side is just take what you want or take 10%, you know? And I don't think either of them is really rooted in the traditional knowledge around these plants, right? I mean, I feel like Indigenous communities have been saying since the dawn of time that their relationships are interwoven with plants, you know? Humans can help build their, like, support plant populations, and plant populations help support humans. It's that relationship of interdependence, but the ways in which we talk about foraging and being with plants don't often reflect that within a Western herbal framework. And so really what we're trying to build is a program that sort of brings together people to be able to figure that out. And so we're working with an advisory committee right now. It's amazing. Joe Pitawanakwat, Linda Black Elk, Ion Gozi, and Manana Bushi, and then myself and Steph, and our coordinator, Sarah, to really build that container of co-creation, which has been amazing. And then we're rebuilding our herbal immersion program as well. So, you know, adding more modules around medicine making, formulating, all these things to be able to sort of like fill the gaps in what exists right now. We don't want to recreate the wheel, but we do want to sort of like serve in a way that really speaks to the needs of our communities right now. So be really hands-on, be really useful, and be answer those questions. I think every single time we've hosted the programs, people are like, I don't know, should I be even touching these plants, or should I be engaging with wild plants? Should I be, you know, and people have all these questions, and a lot of it's so theoretical, but I think when we talk about traditional medicine, even the concept of tradition makes it something of the past. And I think really what we need to do is bring it into the future and bring it into a really embodied practice. And so really that's our goal with these programs, is to be able to incorporate this knowledge, this way of being, into daily life. So, or sorry, and to like root it in reciprocity for our communities,
Yes.
for the original people, for displaced people, for the land, you know, all of those things. So
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it benefits capitalism and colonialism for us to be, capitalism especially, for us to be alienated from nature. You know, I know a lot of people, and for a time this was also me, who were terrified at even the notion of foraging, like the woods is trying to kill me. But really, the woods have been keeping people alive since there have been people, right? Vandana Shiva said something along the lines of, where is the line between the civilization and the wild? It's colonial thinking to say that there is one.
absolutely, that's it, right? And I think it as people who have been severed from those traditions, there is this fear that you're going to fuck it up, or this fear that, you know, like it can be dangerous, or this fear that you don't know. And that's a really real thing. You need to dig into that. Absolutely. Like for me anyways, like I know I want to be responsible, and I don't actually know how to do that. And I think acknowledging that from the get-go is number one, because that means we need to dig in. That means we need to figure out how to do that, how to lay the foundation. And, you know, it's tricky. Like for me as a settler, like I need to figure out what responsibility means. How do I uplift the original people here in a way that I can learn, but that I'm not just taking? And I think there's no easy answer to be able to figure that out. But at the end of the day, we know that the people, the original people here, are asking, are demanding, are saying, you know, we have this responsibility to care for the land, and settler colonialism is standing in the way of that. So on all levels, we need to be able to support that. And whether that's, you know, working at a school and uplifting that, or on the front lines, but we need to be able to do that, because the reality is that severance is what's screwing everything up right now, right? We can't let colonialism and that legacy guide the next 100 years, because we're not going to be here for that. How do we reintegrate, or how do we heal from that fracture, right?
I have been in touch with Mandana Bushi, who I think she signed off her email with something like utopic future seeds. And I'm like, I'm keeping that. I'm using it forever, this notion of utopic future seeds.
Absolutely. No, she's amazing. She's hilarious and so brilliant. And I mean, it's right? Like, it is the future. We have to look back, but we also have to look forward. Like, we're about to get screwed if we don't take this seriously, right? And so the more we can stop looking at it as, the original people used to do this, or we as a people used to do this, like, no, like, this is the reality of what needs to happen in the next like 5-10 years. Like, and if we don't, like, what's going to happen, right? And on all levels.
On all levels. I think we've been really dancing around this, and you've sort of answered this question already in 100 different ways. But tell me about this specific relationship, or how you view this specific relationship between plants and liberation. Or maybe a different way of asking that is like, how can our listeners cultivate this relationship between plants and liberation?
For most of us, our histories of liberation have always incorporated plants. We don't really have that without that. I mean, any story we dig into about sovereignty, about our ability to resist imperialism and colonization, has always tied in plants, whether that's when we're sick, whether that's poisoning our oppressors, whether that's like being able to survive in the middle of a rocky mountain. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, my ancestors hid out in the mountains for 200 years, avoiding complete annihilation by just being able to grow plants on the side of mountains, right? And that's a really beautiful and real example. But the thing is obviously I'm not gonna do that right now, but they've been there for us. They are our food, they are our medicine, and I think I know people, there's often this binary that happens between Western medicine and like herbal medicine, when actually the reality is that Western medicine actually comes from herbal medicine or our traditional or indigenous systems of science. But when we look at preventative care, when we look at community resilience, when we look at all these things, and more research is coming out about like the need for us to have a varying diet of traditional foods, and all that to say that, at the end of the day, like the plants that grow around us help us, right? And when we can eat them or we can use them as medicine, then we become more resilient as people. We become healthier. And so, I mean, there's that, but there's also like, for forever, people have been able to fight off their oppressors with plants. Like a really clear example of that is like the Haitian Revolution and being able to literally poison like slaveholders, right? I mean, that's pretty fucking badass. But then that all around, right? Like people's legacies of ceremony with plants, all of those things have been huge tools in keeping people grounded in like armed struggles, and in fights for liberation. I think, day to day, it's about connection, being able to build relationship with these plants. I think something that happens on the internet is like plants get dwindled down to like this, like 5 top herbs for your lungs, or everybody drinks some elderberry, which, I have my own thoughts about that. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to dig in a little bit deeper, right? Like, and even if we're in a city or something like that, it's just about seeing what's around us and what's not around us, right? What are we seeing here? What is in the ground? What is it a reflection of? Why are these medicines here? What are they trying to tell us about the land? What are they trying to tell us about our bodies? Medicines often come where they need to be, right? In cities or in situations where there's a huge amount of like, let's say, overbearing. There's a lot of different ways to like see this, but like whether that's like toxins or buildup of what I might call dampness, or what, foods that tend to contribute to like diabetes and stuff like that. There's a ton of herbs that are particularly great for those issues just around us, growing in abundance. And we might look at, this superfood or that, but at the end of the day, the answer is in front of us right there. And so those plants tell us stories, but then also the lack of certain plants, or the lack of, the dwindling populations of certain plants also tell us a story, right? And I think just being able to dig into what's going on in the soil, what's happening, what plants are doing really well, and what plants are having a really rough time, and what does that tell us? And just even answering those questions, even if it takes a long time, because sometimes it's hard to come up with the answer. We just begin to peel away at the layers of what's happening. And I think just that is a liberatory thing, because we need to be able to figure that out. We are a reflection of the ecosystem, and those, like, we mirror what's happening. And so it's sort of being able to pull a mirror up at ourselves.
I was just writing down, we are a reflection of the ecosystem, and certainly we are a large part of it, a larger part of it than we probably should be. But I love that you bring this like binary smashing notion to herbalism. First of all, that we can learn from what's there, but also from what's not there. So if we live in urban environments, we can notice where plants are missing, but also, the herbalist as healer, you've kind of shot the binary out of that too, because we're also talking about the herbalist as hexer, as poisoner. I love this like holistic, again, this non-binary approach that you have to dealing with plants.
But it's true though, like, even I remember like digging into just coming back to like what's not there. Just something that is coming out for me is thinking about garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is kind of everywhere here. And oftentimes like people's response to it is to be able to pull it out en masse, and whether or not they make pesto or just throw it in the dump is kind of irrelevant a lot of the time. It's just this act of taking it up and considering that to be like an anti-colonial act, when that's not really done in relationship with the original people here. These are often settler-run projects with the idea that they're repopulating native populations of plants. But actually, recently I dug into sort of research around what happens after that initial stage of being able to pull the garlic mustard up. And what they're finding is that it actually doesn't increase the populations of native plants at all. Which is hilarious, because to me that just goes to show, right? Like, it takes much more than that to be able to support those populations of plants. Like, native plants need their people. Their people have always been there for them. The concept that forests and landscapes prior to colonization, I know people say this all the time, but that the concept that these places weren't, an art in of themselves, or weren't very skillfully cultivated, is absurd, right? And so we always see this, right, with organizations or land trusts that are rooted in concepts of conservation that don't actually directly involve Indigenous people, aren't directly led by Indigenous people. This concept that humans need to get off, and then that the nature will heal itself. We'll just take away this like quote unquote invasive plant, and somehow the native plants will somehow just thrive. And that's actually bullshit. That actually does not happen, right? And that plants are actually smarter than we think, I think, and have their own thing going on. But that also, like, people who have known this land for, since time immemorial actually know way more than whatever the fuck is going on over there, right? And so being able to just like look beyond just like the concept of what's missing, what is here in abundance? Is this a problem? Like, are these like plants that are like so proliferous here that are like not native to here, like simply looking at them as a problem, whereas digging into like, why are they here? What happened? A lot of these plants are here because there's like a huge amount of toxicity in the soil. So what are they doing to that toxicity? And I think there's so much more to dig into when it comes to that stuff. So
yeah, I don't have a source for this because it just came into my memory, but I remember reading this story that like these colonial settlers came to the Americas, and they were like it's a miracle land where all the edible fruits are just lining all the paths. And as if this wasn't like thousands of years of cultivation, but in a different way. It was cultivation in a way that was so, I'll use the word foreign because it's like literal and figurative. This way of cultivating was so foreign to them that they didn't even recognize it as cultivation.
Even like the packaging on plants, like on vegetables, sometimes is like farmed. I'm like, of course it. Like what? What do you mean? Of course it's farmed. I think in the last 200 years, like and even more, but we've had this like huge imperialist sort of presence like across the world, and a lot of it sort of like forced or subjugated people into specific ways of growing food, and that healing from that hasn't really happened to the degree that we need, right? Like I think about, I was just talking to a friend about like the spice trade and like even tea, like in India, the concept of how these things were grown before was completely different to what we see now. And that even now to this day, that system hasn't really healed from that imperialism, that colonization at all. Like it just replicated itself with our own people. And I think like we need to figure that out, like this concept of being able to like decolonize or reassess the ways in which we did things needs to come back, because of course like it's a system born out of trauma, and it to address it on all ends, as herbalists, that's so much of what we do, right? Is to be able to support people with that reality. And I think on all levels and all systems, that's absolutely the response, right? We need to deal with that.
Yeah, I love this like notion of herbalism as harm reduction, as trauma therapy. In addition, we think of it like your friend whose arm exploded, and then you put the poultice of leaves on the arm, and then the arm reduces. But like we also have these emotional, intellectual losses of health, let's say. And herbalism can help that too.
Absolutely, because it's not just like it helps us on a physical level, but oftentimes we're working with plants that are from our lineages, and that connection helps us, I think, on a deeper spiritual level, right? Like from that severance, we're able to like reconnect with what has helped us along the way, and that is invaluable.
I think that it's also kind of the answer to the question of why you needed or felt that you needed to include the word spirit in with the soil and the seed.
Absolutely. We see projects, we see things that happen that are not rooted in our systems of kinship and our systems of, connection to the land, that build up and then fall apart, and it's really about bringing that integrity, that understanding that we are connected and that we need to be able to uplift each other. I can't screw you over. I can't screw over this plant. I can't just rip and take out what I want, or like screw over your community, because at the end of the day, that's going to harm all of us, right? Like we need to work from a place of integrity, and of being able to see the care and the reciprocity between all of us to be able to uplift and do that real work, whatever lineage or whatever system of spirituality or religion or whatever that is that you're working from. At the end of the day, like it's the same shit. Like we need to be able to hold each other, which is a lot more difficult than it sounds sometimes, but it's the reality of where we are. We know that we're connected.
I just know that our listeners are going to absolutely fall in love with you, as I have in this conversation. So please, can you tell them, first of all, if they're scared of plants for whatever reason, what might be like a good way to dip their toe into the water? Let's start there.
I mean, I think just like getting to know a really simple plant. Just start with one. It's like, I think some people have this idea of like, capital H herbalism, you know, like herbalism trademark or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, it's about just developing that relationship, whether that's a dandelion or plantain leaf or whatever's growing in abundance near you that's used as medicine that you know isn't going to like harm you. Like, I think it's just about, you know, dandelion, like if you have a tea that's not going to kill you, and just sit with it, taste it, you know, put it in a salad, you know. And I think just sit with it, see how it feels, see how it tastes. What does that tell you about it? How did you feel after? And, you know, maybe read a thing. Even if you don't remember almost anything of what you read, you're going to hold on to maybe one word. And I think that's fine. I remember my first like herbal class, you could say, that I took. I had like all these notes and I was like, I need to remember all this. And I felt like a failure for not. But at the end of the day, I think I remembered like 2-3 words, and I remembered the name of the plant and just, okay, no, this one is like more like a bitter herb, and bitter supports, you know, the production of bile from the liver. Okay, that's what I've got. Like, this one is like smells sweet and is calming. Great. Like, that's good. Like, stick with that, you know. And as long as you have like a tiny little bit, you are going to keep building on it. We have generations to come to bring this stuff back, right? And the more you kind of immerse yourself within it, the easier it is to understand. It's just little by little. And, you know, even at this point, like, shit, you can get dandelion at the grocery store these days, you know. But like, if you're out in a field or whatever, like, you can grab that too, as long as you think there's like no dog shit on it. Like, go for it, you know. And I think that there's this thing where herbal medicine is a science, and that's absolutely true. And there's like the herbs that cross over between like food and medicine, and I think those are great herbs to start with, like raspberries, raspberry leaf. Like, you know, food is medicine. Even just understanding the concepts of food, like, it's easy to dig in. Like, I think it's one of those things. It's like one of those doors that you open, and once you start to open, it all comes in. But it's just that little act of opening the first little bit that can open that. It's just a matter of putting yourself in there. You don't have to be scared. These are foods.
I'm so happy that you brought the humble dandelion into this circle, into this conversation, because one, like you said, you can eat every single part of it. It's from root to bloom. It's not going to hurt you. And they are everywhere. You don't have to go to like a special, you know, at least in, you know, the country that we live in, they're everywhere. Mm-hmm. And also we can relate to them, because even though they're so useful and so beautiful, our society has decided that they need to be terminated out of all existence, you know, like, even to the point, and I've written about this before, where like I'm sort of rewilding a lot of the space that I have. And so that means, you know, letting dandelions grow. And then I have to contend with, like, are my neighbors going to be mad at me if some of my like dandelion floofs contaminate their perfectly manicured lawn? It's like a real thing. So like symbolically and practically and nutritionally, all of it, seed, soil, spirit, all of these things, we can find those lessons in the humble dandelion. Thank you so much for bringing her to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's like, it's so funny because the amount of dandelion that's imported is absurd, you know.
We eradicate it and then we import it. Thank you, capitalism.
Like, for us anyways, like, as like in Ayurvedic medicine, we use dandelion. In Chinese medicine, we use dandelion. All these systems of medicine throughout throughout the world use dandelion. But so much of it, you know, our people come to this country and obviously are often relegated to like apartment buildings and, you know, housing projects and stuff like that. And we're, you know, suddenly we don't have our patch that we normally like harvest from, or, you know. And so I think it's like so silly. Like it's all this dandelions getting ripped out. Meanwhile, we're like shipping dandelion from like the motherland back to here. And it's like, like what? Why? And so, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think obviously more and more, people are having this like no mow May or something where they're like trying not to mow their lawns. But I think more and more, I'm hoping that it becomes more the norm. Like I remember when I was younger, my parents let, our lawn kind of do whatever it was doing. And, the city bylaw came and that was that, the end. Right. And so I think now you see it more and more where people aren't, getting called for letting things grow as they should. And so, hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll actually see a really different situation, especially as things become a little bit more dire. I'm sure that the line of what's considered acceptable will continue to migrate to something a little bit more reasonable.
Well, that's a utopic future seed if I ever heard one. I truly hope that you're right. Well, I feel like we're at a crossroad, but but I'm so glad that people like you and your collective are bringing these issues to the forefront. And even just like, to use a sort of olden phrase, the consciousness raising, the actual raising of our consciousness to notice plants when they're there, notice plants when they're not there, and like learn something from both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you are such a dandelion. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I can't wait to follow your journey. I think you said the school like on hiatus right now? Or are you like taking students for next year? What's the deal?
Yeah, so right now we've got like a few webinars up. We've got right now, what do we have up? We've got one on like sort of the migration of knowledge out of North Africa to Asia, like a course on that. One around sort of the influence of like traditional practices to Turtle Island, and like the practices of displaced like Africans through the slave trade and their influence on like Western medicine. And then another class with Wendy McCoon's Genius about like sort of how to work, how to like unearth like our oral traditions within families, and working with elders in our communities. So how best to do that, and just sort of like a step-by-step guide. We should have some more webinars up pretty soon. And then, for our bigger programs, we're going to have that up in 2023. And we're really hoping to do it in a way that is like wicked. So
in a really big way. So sometimes we have to take a moment if we're going to do something really fucking big. So listeners, if you are as super excited about Shabina's work as I am, please follow Seed, Soil, and Spirit. And how else can our listeners follow you or get in touch with you or join the school? What's the website? Let's say all those things. We'll put them in the show notes too, listeners, as always. But if you're listening right now and you're like so itchy, as I imagine you would be, to get in touch with Shabina, what's the best way?
So our website is seedsoulspirit.com, and we've got like a wait list or like a mailing list for our programs, and we'll keep you updated that way when they do become available. And then we also are on Instagram at Seed Soul Spirit. So we post there sometimes. Sometimes we even have like job postings and opportunities, volunteer opportunities, all sorts of things like that. So definitely that's like a really good place to get updated about stuff. So yeah.
Do you have any like bumper sticker of a parting message for the universe that you want to share before we spiral out?
I just think that we have like a huge task ahead of us, and I am really excited to see how we can build with one another to co-create the future we want to see. So, if you feel like drawn to reaching out to us, or, feel inspired by our work and want to uplift what we're working on, or, whatever it is, then feel free to get in touch. Like we are so humbled by the support and the sort of environment of co-creation we've built together with ourselves and other schools and other programs, other community groups, other organizing crews, and I think just the more we can be in touch about what we're doing, the better. And so, I'd love to hear what you guys are up to, and just, sending love to everybody, pouring their heart and soul into what needs to get done.
Your excitement about the subject is contagious. I know, once again, that everyone who's listening is going to be really excited about what you're talking about. So thank you again, Shabina Lafleur-Ganji, for sitting down with us, and blessed fucking be.
Thank you for having me.
You must be a witch.
The Missing Witches podcast is created by Risa Dickens and Amy Torok, with insight and support from the Coven at patreon.com/missingwitches. Amy and Risa are the co-authors of Missing Witches, Reclaiming True Histories of Feminist Magic, which is available now wherever you get your books or audiobooks, and of New Moon Magic, 13 anti-capitalist tools for resistance and re-enchantment, coming fall 2023.